I like to think of it as the world's first robot lawyer. DoNotPay will have succeeded if the word lawyer is completely removed from the dictionary for average people.
Joshua Browder is trying to upend the legal services industry. His company, DoNotPay, has built an AI-powered chatbot that interviews users about their legal problems in plain English, then uses their answers to complete and submit legal paperwork on their behalf. The 21-year-old entrepreneur from the UK, who taught himself to code with YouTube videos, lives and works with his 8-person team out of the same Palo Alto house that Mark Zuckerberg rented during his first summer in California building Facebook. DoNotPay initially focused on fighting parking tickets, and Browder says it succeeded about half the time, saving users $16 million in fines over its first 3 years. Now, operating on just over $1 million in venture capital funding, the company is extending its legal services to a broad range of issues, all free of charge.
There are such fundamental issues where the smallest bit of software can help millions of people. People don't even know which courthouse to go to or what documents to file, and if you can just help with that, then you can solve maybe half the problem.
You started with parking tickets because it's a sort of regressive tax on a lot of people that makes the poorest among us pay the most. And in a lot of these cases, people don't even know that they do have some recourse, right? So how do you educate people and how can they find out how you can help them?
So for example, for parking tickets, it actually plays a game of 20 questions with you to figure out a legally sound defense. It will ask you, was the parking bay too small or were the signs hard to read? So we're not expecting people to come in knowing what they can do. Just if they have any issue that bothers them, come to DoNotPay and we'll get you your money back.
DoNotPay's app even monitors users' accounts and can automatically rebook plane tickets when prices drop, request refunds when banks charge illegal overdraft fees, and help users reclaim security deposits from shady landlords.
The flagship feature is if you have a problem with anyone, be it a corporation or your neighbor, you can sue them by pressing a button.
What happens when people actually get to court to contest these things?
So at that point, we actually give you a script which you can read yourself. In the future, I think robots will actually be allowed in court, but until that day comes, people actually have to show up themselves. But they can almost be a conduit for the robot. What we give you is very legally sound, and you can actually play a game of almost learning what you have to say with the robot lawyer in the app.
Browder says the legal industry is so ripe for disruption through software because most services involve nothing more than standardized processes and boilerplate language.
I'm very lucky. Although I hate lawyers, we actually have a few good ones who are helping us.
50 states with a bunch of different jurisdictions within them. You cover that entire gamut of different legal structures?
Yeah. At the end of the day, lawyers like to make it seem like the law is rocket science, but in reality, the law is society's operating system, and the rules should just be able to be coded without some fancy AI. We have got a bit of it on top, but really it's just a rules-based system.
Given that, why are legal services so expensive?
Right now, if you're a lawyer, there's no incentive to innovate. Instead, you can just be making millions of dollars a year by charging clients huge amounts of money. And so because lawyers control the legal system, no one else really understands it. They've kept it that way. And I think it will take people outside of the legal profession, like software, to force them to change.
And what's your response to people that say, you know, you're delving into things like immigration, this is not just a standardized parking ticket, you only have a few lawyers helping you, you can't possibly be providing the level of service that a trained legal professional would?
I think we really have a long way to go, but on the other hand, if it really is that different for every person, doesn't that mean it's unfair?
Do you also hope to sort of incentivize the broader legal system to become more simple and fair in this way?
Yes, and I think the only way to do that is by doing bottom-up approach. I like to think of it as DDoSing the legal system to make it better. One of the most exciting things we have coming out is something that can get you a DMV appointment in a few days rather than months by phoning up the DMV hundreds of times a day and talking to their automated scheduling system to try and look for a cancellation for you.
So this sounds great on my end. It sounds like a nightmare from a bureaucrat's end or a regulator or somebody who works at the DMV. Have you gotten any pushback on any of these initiatives?
We think hard about doing it in an ethical way, so we're only talking to their robots, not real human beings holding up the phone lines. And in fact, a lot of governments welcome DoNotPay. When DoNotPay parking tickets came to Los Angeles, they said, we love it because people write such gibberish in their appeals that at least DoNotPay appeals are standardized and well written. So I think that in the long run, the governments will build their own systems for dealing with all of this traffic, which will lead to a much fairer outcome for everyone.
DoNotPay doesn't charge for any of its legal help. This way, the company can serve clients who can't afford to hire lawyers, such as refugees seeking asylum and homeless people applying for public housing in the UK. The company is also working on a service that helps navigate the US visa process.
All of these processes are so bureaucratic that if you have no resources at all, it really is impossible to get the help you need. So DoNotPay is a completely free public service.
So how do you sustain yourself? How are you making money?
Although we have to make money to sustain ourselves, we're not going to be doing it for charging for our legal services. Maybe one day we will help so many people, for example, fight airlines, that we will learn how to do an airline ourselves, maybe DoNotPay Airlines. That's a big example, but we aim to replace the people we're fighting. That's how we'll make money. But I'm not focused on that at the moment because everything is fully automated. We're very cost efficient.
And there are other similar services, or at least ones that allow you to automatically contest parking tickets,
Yeah.
but they make money by taking a slice of the revenue that they return to people.
Yeah.
Why didn't you adopt that sort of model?
50% of injustice is still injustice, and by profiting off the problems, these companies actually have an incentive to perpetuate them, which is why they haven't been solved. I think the biggest example are all these tax filing services, which are now lobbying the government to keep tax filing complicated. The government has tried to have a much simpler tax filing process, but the companies, publicly listed companies that make money off that sort of thing, are saying, no, we want it to stay complicated. So DoNotPay doesn't have any of the conflict of interest.
But Browder does advocate for more consumer protection laws. DoNotPay never relies on corporate policies to get customers' money back on things like airline tickets, using only regulations buried in fine print.
The way we do it is through these obscure Department of Transportation rules that allow the most non-refundable ticket to become refundable. And that's really important because laws are hard to change. Of course, all these corporations have lobbyists, but it's much harder for them to repeal airline protections than it is for them to just change a customer service policy overnight.
Do you feel that these consumer protections are more necessary in the airline industry, or because, like you were saying earlier, a lot of what you do is help people navigate complexity? The complexity usually ends up hurting the less well off because they're not able to fund actually going through it, don't have the time. So in other areas where, like tax preparation, it's better if it's more simplistic. Why is the deregulatory push in the airline space a problem?
I'm from the UK, and one of the biggest differences I've noticed between the US and the UK is that in the US it's the land of the corporation. In the UK, there are so many rights that everyone has. For example, if the airline changes your flight time, you have a right to cancel. I think that's a very reasonable right for people to have, and DoNotPay helps people exercise those rights. So it's not about complexity, it's just about giving people what they deserve and what's just and fair.
So in the long run,
Yeah.
how do you see DoNotPay sort of expanding? What space
Yeah.
do you see it occupying? And what do you think the future is of legal services once
Yeah.
everything can be automated, including a robot lawyer coming with you to a courtroom?
In Silicon Valley, companies like Airbnb and Twitter have succeeded by adding words to the dictionary. You can tweet something or snap something. I think DoNotPay will have succeeded if the word lawyer is completely removed from the dictionary for average people. There's a $200 billion legal industry at the moment, and DoNotPay will hopefully one day make it free for everyone.